You're listening to the IT Career Energizer podcast, episode 17.
Welcome to the IT Career Energizer podcast. For anyone who wants to build and grow a career in IT, develop and improve your strengths and skills, be inspired and motivated by the successes of others, manage your career progression, and achieve your IT career goals. And now, your host, Phil Burgess.
Hi, Phil here, and welcome to the IT Career Energizer podcast, where I chat with inspiring IT professionals, consultants, and experts every week. To find out more about the podcast, visit itcareerenergizer.com. And now let's chat with today's featured guest, Paul Gerrard. Paul is an internationally renowned and award-winning software engineering consultant, author, and coach. He is also host of the Assurance Leadership Forum, as well as being a regular keynote speaker. So, Paul, can you expand on that rather brief bio?
Thank you. I guess to start at the beginning is my intention when I left school was never to be in IT at all. And my father was an engineer, and I kind of intended to follow in his footsteps. So I did a kind of engineering degree, and there is a method in this madness just to explain why I'm going to this level of detail and ancient history. But I did an engineering degree in civil engineering, and I got a job in a consulting engineers firm. And when I arrived at my desk, I was told by the partner, well, we've no work for you today, but we've just had this computer delivered. Here's the manuals. There's a desk. Go and have a play. See what you can do with it and come and tell us what we can achieve with it. So I was given almost no engineering kind of work to do for the period in my first job at all. So I became, as soon as I learned how to use a computer, I was obviously the world's expert in the office.
Yes.
And it was kind of, my fate was decided for me. So going from an engineering company where I was doing I was like the on-site computer expert, if you like, I went to a bigger firm, I have to say, into their IT department, or I think DP department as it was called in those days, of course, and became a programmer. And then from there I went into a proper data processing business, and from there I became a contractor. So I kind of did very little. I did a little bit of engineering, and there's a very good story I may be able to relate to you a bit later. But my track record of engineering was really quite short, and I was almost pigeonholed into IT almost instantly. So as I traversed engineering to programming, let's say, in about 4 years, for the next 4 years I was kind of a developer in various roles, and then I was a contractor for a company called Mercury Communications. So I don't know if you remember when the telecoms market was deregulated, BT being the monopoly.
Yes.
It was broken up, of course. So I worked for Mercury for about seven and a half years or something. And it was interesting. It was a fascinating thing to have done, because when I started, I was like number 200 and something on the payroll. And when I left, there were about 12,000. So it was like a startup on steroids, if you like. I mean, I know a 200-person company isn't really a startup in today's money, but what I learned from that experience was how to network, how to politic. It was a very political organization in various ways. How to be adaptable as well. And dare I say, looking back, a lot of the activities I found myself falling into naturally. I think nowadays you just call them agile, So I worked with, on-site customer. We had paper prototypes. We did prototyping. We did regular stand-ups, sit-downs, whatever. We had a daily meeting because I was working on the customer site directly. We kind of didn't take life too seriously, so we built what we thought we needed to build in the next week or 2 weeks. I kind of felt at the time that it was kind of chaotic, but looking back, it was probably a good case story, a good case history for an agile team taking off. So we were just finding our feet and using technologies as well. So we used, in the day, things like a language-sensitive editor, if you like, an IDE of the time. We did source code management. We did actually automated testing. We used a thing called Deck Test Manager, which was a terribly crude mechanism for running automated tests. because it didn't have a script language at all. It was straightforward replay of content, which you just fired off at your system on a test and so on.
Yeah.
But all these things kind of gave me a fantastic background, for the first sort of 8 or 9 years of my career. And then I became a contractor with a company called System Evaluative, which was like a boutique testing services business. And since 1992, when that was, I've kind of been into testing services ever since. So I'm rather long in the tooth and probably more experienced than I really ought to admit. But one of the problems I have when people ask me what I do or what I did, I say, well, where do you want to start? And the problem is that, I say it's a problem. The fantastic experience and fun I've had over the last 25 or 35 years now, nearly, is that I've had such a varied kind of existence. I have great difficulty answering when people say, well, what do you do? And I say, well, which year do you want to talk about? Because I honestly feel that every year I've kind of got bored and found myself into another interesting kind of project or situation, whatever.
Yeah.
At any rate, the kind of stuff I do today is, I think, as you said, I'm kind of a testing, let's say, expert. I hate the word guru, but what the hell. I promote myself mostly through conference work, and I do coaching, mentoring, and occasional kind of process improvement kind of jobs, not as many as I used to. I'm a technologist at heart. I'm a programmer at heart, really. So I used to say I write some code every day. Now it's probably I write some code every week. But at heart, I'm a techie, but I've got a bit of a knack of getting on with people and having the interpersonal skills to do problem solving and that kind of stuff as well. So my experience has been driven by people picking up the phone and calling me and saying, we've got a problem that no one seems to either want to solve or can solve. And that's probably accounting for my wider experience than I feel a lot of people have. Okay.
Can you share with us a unique career tip that the IT Career Energizer audience need to know and probably don't?
Oh, now that's a really tricky one because, there's probably, because I do coach people, seriously, and there's probably been a dozen or so people over the years I've given them career advice. But I have to say, and I think it's a question you might throw at me a bit later, is what's the best bit of advice I ever received? Well, the problem I have is I've never had career advice because I've always been so full of myself to kind of bounce that kind of thing off. And apart from that, because my last permanent role with a company was in 1983. So I am so far out of date with how, quote, permanent people think and operate and experience life that actually I don't have advice. But I can say one thing. So I know you're going to press me on this. There's 2 or 3 times in my life over the last, however many years, not to dwell on it. There were 2 or 3 periods where I thought, well, I really need to focus on one aspect in order to make progress or progress as I perceived it in my business. I would rather say business than career in that respect. And what happened in about 1996, there was a change in the way I worked, and I took ownership, if you like, of the running of a small business that I worked for at the time, Evaluative at the time. And my goal then was to say, well, if the business doesn't succeed and I make a real hash of it, I want to have a name, a brand, a personal brand. I want to be known out there. So if I say, look, this business hasn't worked, I'm going to walk away from that I can go out into the marketplace and people will say, it's Paul Gerrard, and we know who he is and what he talks about and what he's about. So the word that sort of focused my mind was this notion of influence. So I set out in 1996 to, in 5 years, have influence over some community or populace, if you like, in the IT world, so that if business I was supposedly trying to lead failed. And I don't know if I thought about that terribly seriously, but it definitely focused my mind. And so my entire kind of energies were about finding work and business and stuff like that, of course. But in parallel, the marketing goal was to become known, was to very definitely become I nearly said a household name, and clearly that's a nonsensical thing to say. But in the world of testing, I had this as a goal, and I wanted to be known, and I wanted to be influential, and it drove me very directly. Now, this is probably completely useless to most other people, but to me, that's what drove me and was my motivation to do almost everything I did. I wanted to set myself apart as someone who could answer almost any question in testing, who could take on any kind of testing project. And again, this sounds terribly arrogant, but that's what was in my mind. And I was very driven by this notion of influencing people and being influential, if you like. So yeah. I can't say that that's a good goal for most people. If it floats your boat, go for it. But that's what floated my boat at the time. And I have to say, I still feel the same way, in that I get great fulfillment out of having conversations where people say, oh, that's a good idea, or I never thought about that, or, I must try this, or years later, people coming back and saying, thanks for that little piece of advice, because now I understand what you were talking about, and I've just caught up, and I get this kind of feedback, and it's the most tremendous thing. You can't buy it. So it's worked for me. Whether I've been successful, I couldn't possibly say, but I've been successful in kind of building a brand. Now,
yes,
I'm the world's worst marketer at exploiting my brand that way, but I have a brand. So people do say, oh yeah, I've heard of you, or, and we kind of had the little conversation as well. I've been very successful at building a brand. I usually tell people I'm the world's worst marketer because I don't exploit it in the way that maybe it could be possible. And I kind of fall flat on that one.
Okay.
Influence is the word that drives me.
Can you tell us about your worst IT career moment and what you learned from that experience?
Oh, good heavens. I think I said before to you that I'm a great believer in that bad experience is good experience. Even if you work on the world's worst project from hell, and it goes terribly wrong, there are things to learn. And so maybe I'm a glass half full person, and that's my perspective on life. I don't know. But there was a project, it's probably 8 or 10 years ago now, where I was asked by the MD of a software product business to take a look at testing. And his brief was basically, I don't know what my testing team does. It was a very successful business, a medium-sized, 35, 50 million pounds a year kind of turnover. So pretty successful, in that regard. Yeah. But not a big company. They were making a lot of money, but not with a huge number of people. So I guess it was successful in that regard. And the MD, or CEO, I can't remember his title now, asked me to talk to the global head of quality, go and dig and see what's going on, and just take a view on how they could improve in one respect, but also to say whether they're doing a good job, yes or no. So I start with the global head of QA. Oh, sorry, one last thing. The CEO sort of said, I need to know whether I should fire the global head of testing.
Right.
It was kind of a brief that I wasn't used to, and probably I was a bit naive. But anyway, I thought, okay, yes, thank you. I'll take a look. So anyway, I interviewed the global head of QA, and his response to my mere presence was to basically say things like, I don't know why you're here, everything's hunky-dory, don't know what your problem is, I'm not interested. I got absolutely nothing out of him.
Uh-huh.
So that was that. Okay, so next I meet the head of QA in London. There are 2 sites, London and New York. And in London, I interviewed this lady. And she said, I don't know why you're here. What's the problem? Why are you doing this? And I said, well, the CEO basically said to me that he doesn't know what you guys do. He doesn't know what testing does for him in his business. And the lady said, oh, that makes me want to resign right now. And she burst into tears. So, okay. So I was kind of, okay, what do I do? Give her a hug or just, it was really kind of an awful kind of moment. She kind of pulled herself together and was absolutely fine in the end. And we had a good conversation in the end. But she just had no idea that this perception was what it was. And that was that. So then I flew over to New York and met the US kind of head of QA and had a similar, but not quite as extreme reaction. Like, I don't know why you're here. So I'm thinking, well, why am I here? What's going on here? And I dug a bit deeper, and then it turned out that the three people, all kind of talked themselves into thinking that everything was hunky-dory. But when I actually met the testers and the test leads, they were very cautious about speaking to me. But it was quite apparent, with certainly a couple of the guys said, oh, yeah, it's not as rosy as it's been made out to you. There's some real issues. We're taking on far too much work. We really don't know what we're doing. And it was like a really bleak picture beneath the level of the, if you like, the management. And so I went back to the CEO and gave her, did a formal report and this, that and the other. And I don't know if he asked me whether I should suggest that he fire the global QA manager, whatever he was called. But I should have said that, and I didn't. And I regret doing that because I think he probably had extreme stress and was coping with it in a not a healthy way, let's say. And there was this unhealthy lack of communication between, if you like, the senior stakeholder and his testing QA, part of his business. Yeah. And I kind of almost switched off and regret not being brutal about it, which I think might have been the better thing to do. And rather I just said, well, these are the 25 ideas I've got that you might look to improve, and here's the top 5 that I think would have the most impact. And it didn't seem to me like this was a good recommendation. And so that was kind of not a good career moment, let's say, for me. I felt like I failed him and the company, And I do recall that, sometime later, the guy was fired and there was a reshuffle and reorganization and so on and so forth. But I kind of regret not thinking my client actually knew what he was asking. I thought I knew better. You get into this mode as a consultant, you think, well, I know better than my clients, and that's not safe. And I've not done that too often, but on that occasion, I think I did. That wasn't very good.
I tend to agree with what you said before you went into the story, that although we talk about worst IT moments, there is always the opportunity to learn from those experiences. And I feel personally that you tend to learn more from projects that have extreme challenges and you may feel are not the most successful than the ones that potentially go more smoothly.
Sure. I mean, there's a case to be made, and I've said this to people over the years, that actually you don't learn from doing it right. You learn from doing it wrong. If you're doing it right, you already know the stuff,
Yes.
Unless you are gambling, which is something not to be recommended too often. But when you discover that you've dug a hole for yourself, you learn a lot about yourself and how to behave in the future. Yeah. So I'm a great believer in bad experience is good experience.
Moving on from your worst moment, can you share with us your IT career highlight or greatest success and how you were able to achieve it?
Well, the job that comes to mind, and I probably bore people who know me, who are listening, if there are people who know me who are listening, but I talk quite strongly about a project I did with BP. Again, it's probably about 10 years ago, maybe now, where I was hired to be the assurance manager for an SAP project, where the BP oil trading business were ripping out. This is not the word they would use, but they were ripping out Oracle financials and putting in SAP to run the finances of their oil trading business globally. And what became apparent to me as I rocked up on site on day one was BP make a lot more money, as far as I understood at the time. They make a lot more money out of oil trading than they do from selling oil out of pumps or getting it out of the ground or anything in between. And in fact, as the oil is extracted and transported across the Atlantic or the Pacific in a tanker, it's bought and sold 20 times. And you could say stuff that's free out of the ground, which I know it's not, but stuff that's free out of the ground is so expensive because it's a commodity that is traded. And so the business that BP were sort of moving towards SAP, so lots of things became apparent. So I thought, well, my role was to, if you like, oversee the testing on a project there was a 2-year project that was running a year late. And when I got involved, there was a year to go, if you like, but it had already run for more than a year already. At any rate, I thought, well, this is quite a major role, and I had a reporting line to the financial controller for the EMEA oil trading business, which is several tens of billions of pound business. So very senior role. So I was kind of oh, okay, I can do this, I think, being my arrogant kind of self. And when I was introduced to the project director, he sort of said, right, Paul, we need a job description. Can you just go and figure something out? So I thought, okay. So I wrote about a page and a half job spec. And I took it back to him about 2 hours later, and he said, no, it's too long. Cut it down. Okay. So I went away and I cut it down to about 2/3 of a page or something like that. He said, no, you're not getting this. You've got 2 PowerPoint bullets, and that's it. Okay. So my role, as it turned out, for this project, that if it went wrong, I was told the price of oil would be affected. So no pressure then. The 2 bullets were these. The first one was, Paul has no responsibility for delivery. So I thought, I like that a lot. But the second one was, I'm accountable for the quality of the testing throughout the program. And there was something like 8 or 10 projects all in to do integration and all sorts of things with this SAP module in the center of it. And that was the challenge I had. I was accountable for the testing throughout the program, but half the testing had already been done because the project was already a year late. So my role was to stand aside from the rest of the project, to sit on the board for the duration of the project. And when the project reported, as it did once every 6 weeks for a full day, and basically reported for 2 or 3 hours saying this is the status of all the projects, the program, risks, my job was basically to say, and they're not lying. But in order to say that, I had to dig and find out what was going on throughout the program, which I did. And essentially my role was kind of part consultant and saying, I really think you should do this, this and this, because in 3 months' time, I'm going to be checking that you've done this, this and this. And I'll be telling the board whether you have done this, this and this, and whether you've done it well, and so on and so forth. And so this was, it was like a 1,000-man-year project overall. So on the one hand, I didn't manage anybody, but I had influence, this is the word I used before, over how the program behaved, and authority to say yes or no. This project, I think if I'd said, the testing was not acceptable and there were real gaps and holes and errors and omissions and all this kind of stuff, in principle I could have said the project cannot go live. As it was, I said the testing was exemplary, I think was the word I used.
Oh, right.
So I had a very positive experience. And then I crossed my fingers that actually nothing went wrong when it did go live. but as far as I know, it went live okay. Yep. And, there were dozens of workarounds and stuff like that. But I found the whole business, the whole BP business, was a very humane company, very people-oriented, in that regard, and very sensible, not mad like some financial services business and banks and can be.
Good. What one thing excites you about the future of a career in IT?
Wow, it's a troublesome one for me. Again, all your questions are hard for me because I don't think this way.
No.
I think that over the course of my career, I've been very lucky to work on the diversity of things that I have.
Yeah.
And I don't mean just the diversity of projects, whether it's large or small, highly technical or business oriented or whatever, but the businesses, the scale, the technologies, and of course technologies have changed over the last 25, 30 years. The people you deal with, the degree of politics, whether it's government versus financial services or retail, whether it's a startup, whatever. I think that the exciting thing for me has been the diversity of the things I've worked on.
Yeah.
So what excites me about the future is that it is possible if you volunteer to do things, right? And that's the big caveat. If you volunteer to do unusual things, you are in a very good position to take on a very diverse range of activities, learning all the time and meeting great people and not so great people, but accumulating experience at a fantastic rate. I'm reminded, and it's probably not a very happy kind of analogy, but it's a bit like being in wartime, where the most remarkable things happen in wartime because, needs must. Yeah, and if you are prepared to commit to courses of action in, a field of battle or a software project, which sometimes feels like a field of battle, you get the experience thick and fast. It comes at you like, nobody's business. So what I have enjoyed and what I continue to enjoy and look forward to is the diversity of people, projects, technologies, businesses. It's just different every day almost. So That's what I find exciting, I have to say.
I'm going to go into the reveal round. So what attracted you to a career in IT in the first place?
Well, nothing, because I wanted to be an engineer.
Yes.
So it was completely accidental.
Yeah.
And from what I just said a minute ago, I've stuck with it because of the variety and diversity, and I've had a lot of fun on it.
Okay. What is the best career advice you've ever received? You were waiting for that question.
I was waiting for that question, and my answer is I'm not sure I've ever had any.
Right.
I cannot think, I'm probably doing someone a great disservice, but I cannot think of anyone giving me career advice. I mean, the worst advice, I can tell you what the worst advice I had is when I went to university. I went to Oxford, and after a couple of years, I'm in the third year, and I go to the careers office to get some advice, and there was some chap, I'm sure he was well-meaning and very smart and, knew what he was up to, but he was like Lieutenant Commander something retired, and he said, right, Paul, what are you up to? And I said, well, I'm doing a degree in engineering science. He said, oh, right, well, it's the Navy for you. And that was it. And I walked out thinking, oh, my God, do I have to join the bloody Navy?
Yes.
Which I clearly didn't. So that was the worst advice, and that was at university. So I do recall that short conversation very clearly.
If you were to begin your IT career again right now, what would you want to do?
Oh, again, this is a tough one. I think the guiding light I have and would continue to have and hope to continue to have is that I keep my eye open for interesting opportunities and things that are different. So I try and understand and figure out what the next big thing is, if you like, in IT or business, perhaps.
Yeah.
And then say, well, okay, so how does that affect me? How does that affect people around me? How does that affect people who I might be able to call clients in the future? For example, going way back when client-server was the next big thing, I figured out how client-server changed what we did as software testers and software engineers and created a training course for software testing in client-server.
Yep.
When the internet came along, because I had this background of client-server stuff, I came up with a friend of mine, we came up with a 5-day class in software testing in the internet. And one little thing to drop in straight away is I think the biggest change in industry that's happened before mobile and the digital thing now was client-server. Internet was not a big change. Internet is simply an instance of client-server. The move to distributed computing was a much bigger step change than the internet. Now, I know it doesn't feel that way, and emotionally doesn't feel that way, but I think technically client-server was a much bigger deal than the internet when it came along. Yeah. So my advice, if you like, my advice to myself is to continue volunteering to take on things that people say, oh, no one knows about that. Well, that to me is an opportunity to go and do a bit of research, play around with some tools on one of my servers, and to discover what containerization is about, Docker, that kind of stuff, which I did 2 years ago. So it's not a terribly interesting subject, but I can talk about it, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And I understand its potential, and its fantastic potential as well. But it's just a piece of technology. And to me, it's about looking forward to things that are going to cause people problems in the future, because then there's an edge you've got over other people. And the other thing is to volunteer. Just volunteer. Step forward when other people don't, and say, I'll take a look at that. I'll do some reading. I'll do some research. I'll write a paper. I'll do a talk, whatever. So I tend to still do that because that's fun. I mean, I really enjoy doing that because it's such a gratifying thing to have people say, oh, I've learned a lot from you today. And you think, that's fantastic.
Yes.
Thanks very much. I love doing that. So that's my advice then. That's my how I would continue to do my career as opposed to how in the future.
Yeah. So what career objectives are you focusing on right now?
Well, I've made a list, and the problem is I know I'm doing far too many things. Like on the one hand, I'm older, okay? So it must have come over by now that I must be 109. So retirement possibly beckons, and it's one of these things that you think as a kid, you think, I'll never retire, I'll never retire. Yes. Decade by decade, you say, I'll never retire. But now I'm thinking, you know what? I'd love to not have the pressure of having to earn a living, but carry on doing the research kind of thing. I'd still love to do that. I still love to write code. So the things I'm actually doing is I'm still writing code, or I've shelved some work I did last year, and I'm going to pick it up again next week or the week after, where I'm working on a bot to support paired testing. So I'm using an Echo Dot and Alexa, Amazon's Alexa, to act as a pair tester, if you like. So you speak to the bot, a bit like I don't know if you heard that, but Alexa just woke up because I said her name in the background. Shut up. So it's a bit like an autopsy, where you have, the doctor's got his hands in the body, covered in blood, can't possibly take notes, speaks to a microphone, it gets transcribed, so on and so forth. If you like, a tester who is exploring some software, testing and doing, going about their business, to have a pair who will take notes, remember what you've said, build the models, capture it in a computer system, and use the knowledge of what's in that database in the computer system, use that knowledge to prompt you to do other things, to search for things, to try things, to give you advice, to remind you about your mission, and so on and so forth. So I'm working on that. I've written a few small pocket books and one big book, but I might write a book on Python for testers this year, or not this year, it might be the tail end of this year I might start it.
Yeah.
That's kind of a back burner thing. I've created over the course of the last 6 months 4 new classes, which were all one-offs, and I'm thinking, you know what, I think other people might find these useful. So I'm going to write a series of blogs introducing the problem that these clients had, and then say, and by the way, here's my class, maybe it'll help you. So I'm going to do that. I volunteered as a business coach in Macclesfield, where I moved to in December last year, just to make some friends and network up here in the north. And I'm actually looking at non-exec and coach mentor roles as well. So I'm less focused on doing consulting, which is basically most of my career, but I'm looking at doing smaller pieces in a diverse way, some of it voluntarily. We'll see where that takes me.
All right. What's the number one non-technical skill that has helped you in your career so far?
Well, I wrote something down. I wrote a single bullet. It's communication skills.
Yeah.
Listening, writing, presenting. It's as simple as that.
Okay. Can you share a parting piece of advice with the IT Career Energizer audience?
I think I've said it.
Yeah.
The thing to me is you could put it in this kind of frame, in that my suggestion would be, when you're working with other people, your career is not yours. Your career is a team effort between you and your network and your family and so on and so forth. Previous and future colleagues and the technologies and the businesses you're working with. It's a team effort. So to me, it's the two things I would say is go the extra mile, under promise, over deliver, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
And the second one, which keeps coming back to me in my head, is to volunteer. Just say you can just have the confidence to say that you can do things that other people aren't willing to do. And whether it's cleaning the drains or it's leading the project to the moon, it doesn't matter what the role is. If your project needs you, you've got to step forward and take that need on. Head on.
No, I totally agree with that. Yes, volunteering definitely makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think so.
And finally, can you tell us the best way that we can connect with you or find out more about you?
I'm on Twitter, so my handle is Paul_Gerrard. My email address, I think you're going to publish this anyway, is paul@gerrardconsulting.com.
Yeah.
If you drop me an email or you get in touch, I can point you at how to get a free copy of my latest book, which is called Digital Assurance, which is a pocket book, about 100 pages or so. CA sponsored it, but I wrote it. Okay, it's my book in that regard.
Yeah.
But CA will give you a free copy if you simply register on their website, so I can point you at that.
Okay.
Maybe you take the link, Phil.
Yeah, we'll include it on the show notes page, yeah.
Up to you. But it's I hope it's a worthwhile exercise. Share your email address to get a hard copy of a book.
Paul, thank you so much for being on the IT Career Energizer podcast today. It's been great chatting with you.
Pleasure. I had fun.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's great interview with Paul Gerrard. Full show notes can be found on the website at itcareerenergizer.com/E17. And while you're at the website, you can download your free copy of 11 top career tips for IT professionals, many of which have been previously discussed on the show. In next week's episode, I'll be talking with Robert C. Martin, author of several books on extreme programming and the initiator of the group that created agile software development from extreme programming techniques. If you haven't done so already, please remember to subscribe in iTunes or Stitcher to get future episodes automatically downloaded to your device. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate you leaving a rating and review in iTunes or Stitcher about the show. Have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the IT Career Energizer podcast. To find out more about building a successful career in IT, visit itcareerenergizer.com.